Amara stepped into the grand mansion, her heart hopeful that tonight would feel different. The golden light sparkled above her, and the air was filled with music and laughter, but the moment her relatives saw her, the warmth ended. Instead of hugs or smiles, she was handed a tray of drinks and told to serve the guests. Her cousins, dressed in silk and diamonds, smirked as they whispered loud enough for her to hear that she would never amount to anything. When she tried to speak about a project she had been working on, her uncle cut her off with cruel laughter, saying people like her should focus on cleaning floors, not contracts. Even her younger cousin snapped at her not to embarrass them with her pretend dreams. The laughter stung, but Amara stayed calm. Deep inside, she held a quiet truth. For the past year she had been working with a global company, finalizing a deal that could change her life. The cruelty only grew worse when one cousin spilled wine on purpose and ordered her to clean it up. Kneeling with tears in her eyes, she heard the whole room erupt in laughter, until the doors opened. Mr. Cato Mensah, one of Africa's most powerful CEOs, stepped in. The room fell silent as he saw Amara on the floor. Smiling warmly, he said, "Why are you kneeling? You just closed a $5 million contract with my company this morning." The hall froze. Gasps filled the air. Her relatives' faces turned pale as everything changed in an instant. Amara balanced the tray of glasses carefully as she moved between the glittering tables. The room smelled of rich wine and perfume, and laughter bounced off the high marble walls. Her relatives sat in silk gowns and fine suits, speaking loudly about money, travels, and business. She wanted to disappear, yet deep inside she carried a secret too heavy to stay silent. Gathering courage, she stepped closer to the table where her uncle sat at the head, boasting about his latest contract. Her voice was soft but steady as she said, "I've been working on a project too. It's a business idea I've been building for months, and it's almost ready." For a heartbeat, she hoped someone would be proud, maybe even curious. But her uncle threw his head back and laughed so loudly the silver spoons rattled on the table. "People like you should focus on cleaning floors, not contracts," he sneered, his words sharp enough to cut. The sound of his laughter spread like fire, and soon the entire table joined him, chuckling as though she had just told the funniest joke in the world. Amara's chest tightened, her face burned hot, and she forced herself not to cry. Their laughter made her feel smaller and smaller, as if she had no place among them. Before she could recover, her younger cousin, dressed in a glittering gown, leaned forward with a smirk. "Don't embarrass us by pretending you're more than what you are," she said, each word dripping with cruelty. The sentence stabbed deeper than the laughter, because it came from someone even younger than her, someone who had never worked a day in her life. The cousins around her snickered, whispering that Amara was desperate for attention, that she should know her place. Amara stood still, gripping the tray tightly so her shaking hands wouldn't show. Her lips wanted to form a reply, but she stayed silent. She knew they wanted to see her angry, broken, and ashamed. Instead, she lowered her eyes, pretending their words slid past her like water. But inside, her heart carried a storm. She thought about the long nights she had spent working, the countless hours planning with a global company that trusted her vision. She thought about the documents sitting on her phone right now, proof that her dream was real, proof that she was not the nobody they believed her to be. As the table filled with more laughter, Amara quietly sent a message under the table, checking on the final papers of the deal that could change everything. No one noticed, no one cared. They only saw a servant girl carrying drinks, not a young woman who had already built a future they could not imagine. She stood there, silent and invisible to them, but in her silence she held power they would soon regret underestimating. Amara stood in the corner of the hall, her hands still trembling from the sting of her uncle's words. The laughter of her family echoed in her ears, cruel and sharp, but her face stayed calm. She did not shout back, she did not argue, and she did not let her tears fall. Everyone expected her to break down, to beg for respect, but she refused to give them that satisfaction. On the surface, she looked like a quiet servant girl who had accepted her fate. But inside, her heart was steady, holding a secret they could never guess. For the past year, while they mocked her and treated her like nothing, Amara had been building something powerful. Night after night she worked in silence, skipping sleep and skipping meals, sitting by a dim lamp with her laptop. She had joined hands with a global firm that believed in her vision, a deal so big it could shift her entire future. Every insult her relatives had thrown at her became fuel, pushing her to work harder. They never knew, because she never told them. Why should she? These were people who laughed at her dreams before she could even finish a sentence. They would never believe her. So she kept her secret safe, waiting for the right moment. Now, as the room buzzed with music and chatter, Amara's phone buzzed softly in her palm. She held it low, hidden under the tablecloth, her thumb moving quickly. She typed a short message, her heart racing. Is the paperwork ready? She pressed send, then lifted her eyes and watched her cousins twirl around the room, mocking her, whispering about how poor and useless she was. Her phone vibrated again, and when she read the reply, her lips curved into the faintest smile. The papers were almost done. The deal was nearly sealed. In a few hours, everything would change. She looked around at the glittering chandeliers, the expensive dresses, the arrogant faces, and she felt no anger anymore. Instead, she felt power rising quietly inside her. They thought she was nothing. They thought she was beneath them. But soon they would know the truth. She picked up another tray of glasses and moved silently through the crowd. To everyone else, she looked small and obedient, someone easy to insult, someone with no future. But in her mind, she was already standing taller than them all. Every cruel laugh only made her victory sweeter, because she knew the tables would turn in a way none of them could imagine. Amara's silence was not weakness. It was her shield. It was her confidence. And as the night carried on, she held that silence close, waiting, knowing the moment of truth was coming faster than anyone in that hall could see. The night grew colder for Amara even inside the glittering mansion. She was carrying a tray of empty glasses when one of her cousins, dressed in gold, smirked and whispered to another. Then, with a cruel grin, the cousin tilted her glass and let the deep red wine spill onto the polished marble floor. Gasps echoed for a moment, but then the cousin's voice cut through the air like a whip. Clean that up before the guests arrive. Her tone wasn't a request, it was a command. Everyone's eyes turned toward Amara, waiting, watching, hungry for the show. Amara froze. The stain spread like blood on the floor, and she felt her chest tighten. For a second she thought of standing tall, refusing, but the sharp looks around her pushed her down. Slowly, with trembling hands, she set the tray aside and knelt. Her knees pressed into the cold marble as she grabbed a cloth. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. Her cousins laughed, nudging each other, whispering that this was exactly where she belonged. One uncle chuckled loudly and said, "See? Some people are only fit for the ground." Tears filled her eyes, blurring the gold chandeliers above her. Her hands shook as she dabbed at the wine, but the more she tried to clean, the louder their laughter grew. The sound of it wrapped around her, heavy and cruel. It was no longer just laughter, it was mockery, it was scorn, it was every insult she had endured since childhood rising again in front of everyone. She wanted to scream, to shout, to remind them of who she really was, but instead she kept her lips pressed tight. The storm in her heart raged, but outside she looked small, broken, and alone. Then, just as the laughter reached its loudest, the giant doors at the front of the hall swung open with a heavy creak. The sound cut through the noise, and the entire room froze. The music stopped. The laughter died mid-breath. Every head turned toward the entrance. Stepping inside with calm authority was Mr. Cato Mensa, a man whose name carried power across Africa. Tall, sharp, and confident, he walked with the grace of someone used to commanding boardrooms and governments alike. His presence alone shifted the air. Suddenly the same relatives who had been mocking Amara seconds before were straightening their clothes and fixing their smiles. But Mr. Mensa's eyes did not scan the rich family seated at the tables. They did not linger on the chandeliers, the food, or the wealth displayed around the hall. His gaze went straight to the floor, straight to where Amara was kneeling, her hands stained with spilled wine, her face wet with tears. The room was silent, thick with shock. The same people who moments ago ordered her like a servant now held their breath, unsure of what he would say. And in that silence, Amara slowly lifted her head, meeting the powerful man's eyes, her heart beating faster than it ever had before. Something was about to change. Everything was about to change. All eyes followed Mr. Cato Mensah as he strode into the hall, his polished shoes echoing on the marble floor. His presence alone carried a weight that made even the proudest uncle sit up straight. The music stopped, the laughter was swallowed, and the clinking of glasses froze in the air. But Mr. Mensah wasn't looking at the decorated tables or the rich relatives scrambling to adjust their clothes. His eyes went straight to the floor, where Amara knelt with a cloth in her hand, her knees pressed into the cold marble, her face wet with shame. For a moment, Amara could not breathe. She expected him to walk past her as everyone else always did, to pretend he didn't see her humiliation. But instead, his sharp expression softened, and a smile spread across his face. His deep voice carried through the hall, strong and clear, "Why are you on the floor? You just closed a $5 million contract with my company this morning." The words dropped like thunder. For a second, silence held the room. Then came the gasps, sharp, loud, echoing from every corner of the hall. Mouths opened wide, jaws dropping in disbelief. Glasses trembled in the air, some nearly spilling their wine. A fork slipped from someone's hand and clattered loudly against a plate, breaking the stillness. Amara's cousins, who just seconds ago were smirking at her misery, froze in shock. Their mocking smiles vanished, replaced by pale faces and wide, blinking eyes. One cousin whispered, "What did he just say?" Another clutched her chest as if she had been struck. Even her uncle, who had laughed the loudest at her dreams, sat stiff in his chair, his glass of wine shaking in his hand. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. The tears that had burned her cheeks moments ago now felt different. They were no longer tears of shame but of release. She rose slowly from the floor, her head lifting higher with each second. The cloth slipped from her hand and dropped onto the red stain, forgotten. Mr. Mensah's gaze stayed on her, proud and warm, as though he had been waiting for this moment as much as she had. The hall buzzed with whispers, disbelief spreading like fire. Amara? A contract? $5 million. With him? Nobody could hide their shock. The same people who mocked her for dreaming now looked at her as if they were seeing her for the very first time. Mr. Mensah stepped forward, ignoring the stares. "You've worked hard for this, Amara. You deserve respect, not ridicule." His voice cut through the whispers, commanding attention. With those words, he didn't just lift Amara up, he exposed every cruel laugh, every insult, every lie spoken against her. In that moment, the power in the room shifted. Amara was no longer the servant girl on her knees. She was the woman who had just been announced as the architect of a $5 million deal, the one person in the hall who stood taller than them all. And nothing, not even their disbelief, could take that away. The hall was still buzzing from Mr. Mensah's words when the first wave of panic spread across Amara's relatives. Seconds ago, they were laughing at her on the floor, but now they were jumping to their feet, forcing smiles that looked stiff and shaky. One cousin clapped her hands too loudly, her voice rising in a false cheer, "We always knew Amara was destined for greatness." Another rushed to hug her, though the same lips had called her worthless only minutes earlier. The air was thick with fake congratulations, their words dripping with desperation as they scrambled to cover their shame. Her uncle, the one who had laughed so hard at her dreams, stood up proudly as if this victory were his own. He raised his glass and shouted for everyone to hear, "This is my niece, my blood. I told you she was special." His tone was filled with pride, but his eyes darted nervously around the room, searching for approval. He tried to claim her success as his family's honor, pretending he had always believed in her, pretending he had supported her from the start. But before anyone could respond, Mr. Mensah turned sharply, his commanding voice slicing through the hall. Enough. The single word silenced the chatter instantly. Every eye turned to him as he fixed his gaze on the uncle. His face was calm, but his words carried fire. Do not stand here and lie. She earned this herself. You did not believe in her. You mocked her. You told her she was nothing. Don't try now. The room fell into a heavy silence. The uncle's face lost all its color, his lips opening but no words coming out. His hands trembled as he set his glass back down, his proud pose collapsing into something small and weak. Around him, the cousins shifted uncomfortably, their painted smiles fading into guilt. Some lowered their heads, unable to meet Amara's eyes. Others flushed red, their embarrassment burning hotter with every second of silence. Amara stood quietly, watching it all. The same people who once treated her like a servant were now squirming under the truth. Their arrogance was stripped away, and for the first time, they had to face the weight of their cruelty. She didn't need to speak, Mr. Mensah's words had already spoken for her. The shame on their faces was punishment enough. One cousin tried to laugh it off, mumbling, it was all just jokes, but her voice cracked, betraying her fear. Another fidgeted with her jewelry, staring at the floor as if it could swallow her whole. They had spent years pushing Amara down, and now, in front of everyone, their hypocrisy was laid bare. The power in the room had shifted completely. No one was laughing now. No one dared to sneer. Their faces burned red, their pride shattered, while Amara stood taller than she ever had, her silence louder than all their false praise. For a long moment, Amara stood still, letting the silence press down on the hall. Her relatives shifted in their seats, their fake smiles fading, their faces still burning from Mr. Mensah's words. The air was heavy, thick with the truth they could not escape. Finally, Amara drew in a slow breath and stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Every head turned toward her, waiting, unsure if she would cry, beg, or forgive. But when she opened her mouth, her voice was steady, clear, and stronger than anyone had ever heard it before. All my life, she began, her eyes sweeping across the room, landing on each relative who had mocked her, you treated me like help. You made me carry trays, clean spills, run after your coats. You laughed at my dreams before I even finished speaking. You told me I would never be anything more than a servant. Her words cut like glass, and no one dared to interrupt. Her uncle lowered his eyes, her cousins twisted their rings and chains nervously, unable to meet her gaze. But tonight, she continued, her voice rising just enough to fill the hall, you proved something to me. You proved why I never needed your approval. Why I never begged for your love. Because my worth was never in your hands. This contract isn't just business, it's freedom. It's the proof that I was never who you said I was. Gasps whispered through the room, but Amara didn't stop. She lifted the wine glass that had been forced into her hand earlier, the same symbol of her humiliation, and held it for a brief second. The room was silent, waiting for her next move. Then, with calm grace, she set it down firmly on the table. The soft clink of glass against wood echoed like thunder in the quiet hall. Her head lifted higher as she turned away. The girl they had once ridiculed now walked with the poise of a queen, her back straight, her steps unhurried, her presence commanding. No one moved to stop her. No one dared. Whispers rippled behind her, but none of them had the courage to speak her name aloud. The same people who once reduced her to silence now sat mute, powerless, as she chose to leave them behind. Mr. Mensah gave her a respectful nod as she passed, pride in his eyes. Without a backward glance, Amara walked through the same doors that had opened for him moments earlier. She did not look back at their faces, twisted with regret. She did not need to. She already knew the truth, they had lost her forever. And as the heavy doors closed behind her, the hall was left in suffocating silence. The sound of her exit was louder than any insult they had ever thrown at her. It was her mic drop, her final answer, and it echoed in every corner of their hearts. The hall was still heavy with silence when Amara's footsteps faded beyond the doors. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the sound of another pair of shoes echoed against the marble. Mr. Cato Mensa, the man whose words had turned the entire night upside down, walked after her with calm confidence. Just before stepping out, he turned slightly and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's go celebrate your victory," he said, his voice filled with warmth and certainty. The words cut through the room like lightning, and then he was gone, leaving the family frozen in their shame. Inside, her relatives sat like statues, their faces pale and stiff. Some stared at the floor, others at their untouched glasses, but none of them dared to speak. The laughter that once filled the hall was gone. All that remained was the crushing weight of humiliation. They had mocked her, they had insulted her, and in their arrogance, they had missed their chance to stand beside her. The woman they called nothing had surpassed them all, and now the world would know it. Outside, the cool night air embraced Amara as she walked down the mansion steps, her head high, her heart steady. A sleek convoy of black SUVs waited at the entrance, doors open as if for royalty. She slid into the back seat of the first car, her phone buzzing endlessly in her hand. Messages poured in, investors, partners, and friends congratulating her on the deal. Every buzz was proof that her future had arrived. As the SUVs pulled away, their engines humming in unison, Amara didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her was only shame and regret. Ahead of her was freedom, power, and a story that would spread far and wide.